As a result of the changes with managed moves and the LEA seeking alternatives to permanent exclusion, this year, touch wood, I haven't excluded anybody permanently at all.
Since March 2003, Coventry's 19 secondary heads, working with the LEA, have created an alternative to permanent exclusion called managed moves. Pupils at risk of exclusion are transferred via a pupil referral unit from one school to another.
The formal process of excluding a pupil, permanently excluding a pupil, is a fairly nasty business. The difference really for a pupil who is going through the managed move process, there's a lot more support available for them. And what we try to do with the support that we would put in through the pupil referral unit is to work with them on some of those problems, to give them that support, to build up their self-esteem a bit.
Managed moves have also been used to negotiate a fairer distribution of difficult pupils. Bars Hill has the largest number of vacant places in Coventry, so is particularly vulnerable to being dumped on by other schools.
The phrase that Charles Clarke used about the dangers of sync schools was a bit alarmist. What it actually highlighted was a recognition in government that fairer distribution of scallywags, if you might like to put them like that, is called for.
Bars Hill has a high proportion of refugees and EAL students, so the added burden of taking in excluded pupils from other schools makes Robin Brabham's job much more difficult.
It does concern me when I, in my early days here, was ending up as the end excluder for pupils who came here from other schools. And in fact, a sizable proportion, usually over half, of the people that I was driven to permanently exclude when there wasn't an alternative had actually started their school career elsewhere. For example, in 2000 to 2001, I had to permanently exclude 4 pupils, and 3 of them had started their secondary schooling in other Coventry schools. In the following year it was 6, of whom 4 had started in other Coventry schools. 2002 to 3 it was 9, it was right up till 9. And 5 of those had started at other Coventry schools and 2 of them had come from elsewhere. And that's stuck in the throat a bit, really.
When Robin arrived 6 years ago, he began campaigning to cut the numbers of excluded pupils being forced on him. His outspokenness even led to a meeting with the Prime Minister.
I was one of, I think, 4 secondary head teachers from around the country invited, and sat around the cabinet table with Estelle Morris and Stephen Twigg and so on. But the seriousness of the issue was fully taken on board, and I was very pleased to see in the Times Educational Supplement the following week that that was one of the salient points that the Prime Minister had elicited from the meeting.
He also applied pressure on Coventry's Secondary Heads Association, who meet regularly under the chairmanship of the head of Ernsford Grange School, Julian Charters.
There has been a concerted effort to try to prevent schools with surplus places being dumped on, which is the expression that schools will sometimes have used in the past. And certainly there was a perception from the staff in Bars Hill that they were receiving too many disruptive and difficult pupils. That may have had some element of truth in it. Certainly over the last few years there's been a determined effort to try to prevent that happening. I know that Robin Brabham, the head there, does feel still that there are too many students that are placed in the school with difficulties.
But over the past 4 years, there's been a gradual shift in attitudes.
I think up till a few years ago, the secondary heads were a little bit wary of any collective agreement because certain heads might have wanted to protect their own interests, and the schools that were regarded as being very successful would not want to be seen to be threatening their standards. Over the last few years that has become quite different. There is a perception now that heads will support each other, that they will take on the burden of dealing with difficult students in a much more fair and collective way.
This improved cooperation was key to the development of the managed move system.
Managed move between schools are being arranged by the authority, with the children leaving a home school going into approved placement until such time as they show that they can settle and they can operate properly in the fresh school. And children sometimes do respond very well to having another chance without having the stigma of being excluded.
Oh, hello, it's Marion Simpson from the LEA. I've got a meeting with the head. Come in. Thank you.
Marion Simpson is Coventry's liaison officer, organising transfers between schools and the PRU.
Okay.
Today, she's visiting Bars Hill to discuss a new case.
He was seen by me with his father and head of year, promised nothing like this would ever happen again, but something worse has happened. But I suspect he might be, for his own sake as well as for the good order of the place, a potential managed move to another school.
Right.
Okay. He behaved in a very, bizarre way towards another boy, and there's some evidence of him self-harming.
What's the young man been like in terms of it?
In class, he's not. In class,
education?
he's fairly compliant.
Academically, what's he like?
Middle of the road.
Right.
But he's not special needs by any means. But his behaviour is becoming increasingly bizarre.
Perhaps what we need to consider is whether we place this young man into the pupil referral unit, because we could place him in the PRU, as you know, and then obviously do some assessment, do some work with him. When colleagues in the PRU feel that he is appropriate to go back into a mainstream school, then we could obviously do a managed move into an alternative school.
Thanks a lot.
Okay. Thank you.
I'll walk out with you.
There are also financial incentives.
Okay.
Schools are charged £4,500 for a permanent exclusion, but just £3,500 for a managed move. And schools who take on an excluded child from the PRU get £3,000.
In terms of the government talking about not overburdening particular schools, what we've done in Coventry has been very supportive towards that, because we've got agreement from all of our 19 schools that instead of us only actually contacting a few schools where there are places, that each of the 19 schools will either take in 2, 3 or 4 pupils, depending on size and other factors of the area. So that actually spreads this across all the schools, so that's been very positive.
Overseeing the managed move scheme is Martin Bonathan, Coventry Council's head of inclusion. He claims that managed moves offer pupils a much more sympathetic approach.
Although these pupils do often present very challenging behaviour, I mean they really do create difficulties for schools, and we're well aware of that, they're also very vulnerable. What we try to do through the pupil referral unit is to build up their self-esteem a bit, because the truth is that most of the pupils, the vast majority of pupils who come here, want to be at school. They want to go back to school. They want to be successful. They may not demonstrate that in the way in which they behave sometimes, but they actually do want to, and the successes that we achieve with those pupils demonstrate that, I think.
Under the new scheme, permanent exclusions have dropped from over 70 last year to just 3 so far this year, although the number of managed moves is as high as the numbers that used to be excluded.
We have replaced a lot of our permanent exclusions with managed moves. We last year transferred on managed moves about 29, 30 pupils. That was at Key Stage 3. And we placed about the same number of young people on different alternative programmes at Key Stage 4.
Central to the success of the scheme is the cooperation between the heads of the city's 19 schools.
The first thing, of course, is that you have to have a strong partnership with schools, and it really is worth taking the time to talk it through with them and to agree it with them and to ensure that that you are all working towards the same end. So I think it is worth investing that time with secondary head teachers, because it really is about trust and that strong relationship. So that's the bottom line for me, I think.
Perhaps not surprisingly, the biggest challenge is getting high-achieving schools to fully cooperate with the fairer allocation of problem pupils.
It's true, of course, that some schools will take more than others, but the schools that do work with higher achieving pupils, that don't deal with the range of pressures that others perhaps do, are still very keen to work with us to support vulnerable pupils. They will inevitably only work with a certain amount. They will inevitably not be taking as many as some schools.
And another danger is heads doing informal deals over pupils outside the Manage Moves framework.
The most important way that colleague heads can help this situation in all our schools is to use the Managed Moves process and not the informal, whisper in the ear about a fresh start somewhere else. That, I think, there's a recognition that we've all got a duty to follow the right line now.
Once the pupils have moved to a new school, learning support units try to ensure a smooth transition.
We'll go through here.
Leslie Longdon, learning mentor at Bars Hill, is seeing Israel for an update.
It was a bit different because when I first got into my classroom, everyone was just looking at me and not like, saying how welcome to our school and that. But at break time, and then loads of people come up to me and said, come with us and we'll show you some people.
Right. So you felt quite welcome then, didn't you? I know.
I was a bit scared then because I thought at break time, who am I going to hang around with?
Yeah.
But quite a lot of people come up to me and made me welcome.
Yeah, that's good.
After the first week then, I made quite a lot of friends, knew who my friends was. And I started sussing people out who not to hang around with and who to hang around with.
When pupils move to this school, I think generally they settle down okay for the first few months. What I've been finding is it's about 6 months into their move that some of the older issues that they had in their other school do crop up, even though I may have spoken to them as a mentor about some of the issues, i.e. bullying and maybe their attitude towards work and to school and to other people. They tend to go through this honeymoon period, my experience, and then the issues can kick off again. So the move doesn't necessarily always change it for pupils, make things right for pupils. For some it has been good, for some that you can see they have settled down, they have come into a school, they have found that a new environment was just what they needed, but for others the issues run deeper.
Hello, I'll see you later.
Okay.
Managed Moves might not work out for everyone, but they are creating a fairer distribution of pupils between Coventry's schools.
Under the new regime, there is a fairness about allocating youngsters between schools. So I think the trend is changing, and I think, in fairness to all colleagues, we're all saying the right thing at the very least, and the practice tends to show that all schools are taking more of a fair share of the youngsters that challenge us all.